My parents forbade me from coming home for Christmas because they were afraid it would be awkward in front of my sister's future in-laws. On the day of her interview, HR said, "The CEO will come in for the last 5 minutes." She didn't know that CEO was me. If you've ever been pushed away from the table simply because you didn't fit the mold someone else built for you, remember this. You can always build your own table. Where are you watching from? Tell me your story in the comments below. Austin in December carries a dry chill, not damp like the East, nor skin-cutting like the North. That afternoon, the sky was heavy and gray, but the glass towers along Congress Avenue still reflected the last golden light of the day, casting the city in a hue of weathered bronze. I stood in the 22nd floor conference room of Lumen Bridge, arms folded across my chest, eyes trailing the slow crawl of traffic winding through the tangled streets below. A few employees were still around, the clatter of keyboards and the hiss of the coffee machine echoing faintly from the pantry at the end of the hall. I was just about to return to my desk to finalize the quarterly financial report when my phone buzzed. On the screen appeared the name of my mother, Elaine Bennett. 3 weeks before Christmas, I froze for a moment. In recent years, Christmas in my family had been reduced to a quick text or, at most, a rushed call on the night of the 24th. A call this early in the season was rare indeed. "Avery, it's Mom." Her voice rang out, carrying a blend of cheer and formality, the kind of tone she only used when she had something important to announce. "This year, your father and I have decided to make Christmas a little bigger. The Carlisle family will be there, a few friends from the parish as well. The whole family will gather in Columbus like the old days. Can you arrange to come home?" I leaned lightly against the glass pane, my eyes still fixed on the hurried stream of people crossing the street below. A strange feeling stirred inside me, like after years of being pushed to the margins, someone had suddenly opened a door and invited me back to the old family table. "I'll make arrangements," I answered, keeping my voice as even as I could. Mother rushed to add, as if afraid I might change my mind. "Oh, and remember to wear something bright, darling. No need for those stiff office suits. You know the Carlyles refined people, successful. We should leave a good impression." I curved my lips into a faint smile that never reached my eyes. Yes, the Carlyles. I had heard their name for over a year now, ever since Sabrina, my younger sister, went public with her relationship with Ethan Carlisle, the only son of Cleveland's well-known legal dynasty. Every photo on my mother's Facebook revolved around fancy dinners where Ethan was present, every post a subtle brag about her future son-in-law with his spotless academic record. I was never in any of the pictures. 3 weeks before Christmas, she had called with that cheerful tone, reminding me about the dress code, about making an impression before the groom's family, about the whole family being together. A small part of me wanted to believe maybe this year was different, that they truly wanted me there, not because someone else was watching, but because I was their daughter. But only a week later, after I had just booked my Columbus-Austin flight, my phone rang again. This time it was Father Michael Bennett. He rarely called me directly, so when his name appeared on the screen, I thought something urgent must have happened. "Avery." His voice was gravelly and firm, without the circling warmth of my mother's. "I think, this year, you shouldn't come home for Christmas." I froze for several seconds. "What do you mean?" "Last week Mom said." "We've talked it over," he cut in. "The Carlyles will be there, and so will people from the parish. We want everything to go smoothly. You're too independent, always talking about work. When people ask about family, about marriage plans, it becomes awkward. I'm only thinking of you." His words came out steady, without a flicker of hesitation, as if he were talking about the weather. A hollow laugh rose in my throat, choking me. They didn't want me home not because I was busy, or because the house was too small, but because my presence, the unmarried daughter past 30, running a tech company no one in my family had ever truly understood, might make their Christmas gathering look less polished in the eyes of outsiders. I stared at the plane ticket still open on my laptop screen. One click was all it would take to refund it. On the other end of the line, my father kept speaking about family reputation. About how Sabrina and Ethan are such a perfect match. About how people will judge the eldest daughter of the Bennett family. His voice faded into static. Only one blunt thought echoed in my mind. They're not forbidding me because I've done something wrong. They're forbidding me because I don't fit the picture they want to display. I ended the call, opened the airline's email, and canceled the ticket. Outside the glass window, Austin's streetlights flicked on, their glow glinting off the facades of tall buildings. I felt as though I stood on the far side of a thick wall, watching a glittering party where familiar faces smiled and clinked glasses just with no seat reserved for me. In that moment, memories I could never shake surged back. Columbus, Ohio, the city where I was born and raised, was just big enough to have shopping centers lit year-round, yet small enough that every family in the neighborhood knew each other. In the front yard, every summer my father pitched a canopy for barbecues, and every winter my mother strung lights along the porch so the house stood out brightly in the block. From the outside looking in, the Bennetts appeared to be the model American family. A father managing a retail chain, a mother working in a dental office, and two daughters, one older, one younger, always neatly dressed for the annual Thanksgiving church photo. But behind those framed pictures hanging in the living room, the reality was never quite so balanced. From a young age, my sister Sabrina had always been the star of the family. Father often called her his stage girl, while mother said she was the perfectly feminine daughter. She was enrolled in ballet at the age of 5, later moving on to theater and choir classes. Every time there was a school performance, the entire family went together. Father brought along his camcorder, mother carried fresh flowers, and I was usually reminded, don't dress too formally, you'll overshadow your sister. At the end of every show, applause thundered as Sabrina dashed backstage into waiting arms and endless praise, while I stood somewhere in the back, holding her makeup box. As for me, my joy came from sitting in the robotics club, wiring tiny circuits, or pressing the slightly out-of-tune keys of the school's old piano. Once, I made it to the finals of a citywide piano competition, and the teachers promised to send invitations to parents. But on the morning of the performance, mother sighed. Your father has to take Sabrina to rehearsal, and I have a hair appointment for her. Just take the school bus, Avery. You're strong enough you can handle it yourself. I nodded, swallowing hard. When the performance ended, I scanned the auditorium for familiar faces, but only empty seats stared back. During those childhood Christmases, it was always my grandmother, the only one who seemed to notice the silence inside me, who placed a small gift in my hand. Not a doll or a new dress, but glass snow globes. She told me, when you shake it, the snow always falls at the right time, even if it's slow. Patience has its own kind of magic, Avery. I kept each one like a treasure, lined up on the shelf in my bedroom. Whenever I felt invisible amid the cheers for Sabrina, I would shake a globe, watch the white flakes drift slowly down onto the tiny house inside, and imagine a world where I, too, was seen and heard. The clearest turning point came in high school. I entered the statewide programming competition and, to everyone's surprise, won first place, a prestigious award no one from my school had earned in years. The computer lab erupted with cheers, and the principal even called my parents to share the news. I hoped, just this once, they would be proud. But when I came home, the announcement board in our living room was already plastered with oversized color prints of Sabrina in her ball gown, her sparkling crown from being chosen for the homecoming court. My photo, just a single small print from a cheap home printer, was tacked crookedly in the bottom corner, nearly hidden behind Sabrina's radiant smile. I froze, but said nothing. At times, I wondered if my parents didn't love me. But, over the years, I came to understand it wasn't outright rejection. In their eyes, Sabrina was fragile, someone who needed protection. I, on the other hand, was already strong, able to handle myself. Whenever I was forgotten, their excuse was always the same. You can endure it, Avery. If your sister failed, she would shatter. And so, unconsciously, they poured all their attention, money, and opportunities into Sabrina, while I became the backup child left on the margins to build everything on my own. Once, I overheard my mother late at night, thinking I was asleep. If Sabrina falls, she'll never get back up. But Avery is different, she's tougher, she doesn't need us as much. Those words slipped into my ears like a fine blade and cut deep. They thought I didn't need them, but the truth was, I longed just once to be at the center, to be truly seen by my parents without having to carry the mask of strength. Those years taught me how to stand tall, yes. But they also carved out a lasting emptiness. That's why, later on, whenever a Christmas phone call came, my heart tightened with both yearning and caution. I had grown so used to being the one who was fine on her own, that even when I was invited back, I couldn't help but fear it was only to serve once again as the backdrop for someone else's spotlight. And it was from that childhood of blatant favoritism that I realized my journey would never be supported by my parents. If I wanted to be seen, if I wanted to be recognized, I would have to create my own light. By senior year of high school, when everyone began discussing colleges, I already knew I would have to carve out my own path. Sabrina had a fund set aside for years, and my mother often bragged to the neighbors. My youngest will surely attend a prestigious private school, study communications, and go into entertainment or PR. She has such a gift for speaking and knows how to draw attention. As for me, when I asked my father about tuition, he merely cleared his throat and said, "You're strong enough to manage. We've given everything to your sister since the day she was born. We must ensure she has the best chance." I nodded without protest, too accustomed to that role by then. But I didn't give up. I devoted the entire summer before senior year to applying for scholarships everywhere, attending interviews, writing essays late into the night. The result was a full-ride scholarship to Ohio State University in computer science, with a minor in business. I can still remember the day the acceptance letter arrived, my hands trembling as I opened the envelope, my grandmother's words echoing in my head as clearly as the day she gave me that snow globe. Patience has its own kind of magic, Avery. That magic had finally appeared. When I arrived in Columbus for college, I didn't just study, I threw myself into work. By day I went to class, in the afternoons I worked as a barista at a cafe near campus, in the evenings I was a teaching assistant for the introductory programming course, and on weekends I freelanced, building websites for small shops around the city. Some nights I stumbled back to the dorm exhausted, but when I saw that my tuition and book fees were fully covered, I knew I had won an important battle. Meanwhile, Sabrina's path was entirely different. She was accepted into an expensive private university in Florida, majoring in communications. On the day she left for the airport, my parents bustled around carrying her suitcases, snapping pictures, and showering her with reminders. "Just focus on studying, don't worry about anything else. The family will take care of it all." I stood beside them, my own suitcase containing only a few plain clothes, no cameras, no farewell fanfare. I wasn't jealous, but I couldn't deny the feeling of being little more than a shadow. 2 years later, while I was cramming for finals and serving coffee on my night shift, Sabrina called to announce, "I dropped out, Avery. Those classes were so boring. I want to take a gap year, move to LA, try content creation, maybe land a job at a big entertainment company." I listened while glancing at the chalkboard in the cafe where someone had scribbled "out of milk," and I silently wondered how my parents were going to fund this new plan. But not long after, my mother's Facebook was filled with photos of Sabrina posing on Santa Monica Beach, checking in at rooftop bars, captions brimming with pride. "My daughter is finding her new path, and the family fully supports her." Of course, that gap year was still financed by my parents. My 4 years of college were 4 years of studying while working, accumulating every bit of experience I could. When I graduated with honors, I applied everywhere and was fortunate to land a job at a small tech startup in Denver as a product analyst. It wasn't a big company, barely a dozen employees squeezed into an office space rented from an old warehouse, but I treated it as my first step. In those early days in Denver, I walked to the office through snow and wind, ate cheap sandwiches for lunch, and sat glued to the screen late into the night. I learned to read customer data, design reports, and write user stories for the dev team. Every time the product rolled out a new feature that I had contributed to, I felt a little more that the sleepless nights had been worth it. About 2 years later, when the tech boom was surging in Texas, I decided to move to Austin. The city had become a magnet for companies big and small, with a cost of living far more manageable than Silicon Valley and opportunities that stretched wide open. I packed my belongings into my old car and drove more than 1,000 miles south, my heart pounding with both nerves and excitement. I believed Austin would give me more than just a temporary chance. It could become the place where I built my future. While I was starting over with small projects in Austin, Sabrina was still living off the steady stream of money from our parents. At times, she tried her hand as a content creator. Other times, she joined a fledgling PR agency. Her Instagram overflowed with pictures of chic brunches, beach vacations, and captions filled with inspirational lines about living life to the fullest. Meanwhile, I counted every dollar to cover rent for my tiny apartment and the cost of a new computer. In the first year after graduation, I still held on to a fragile hope that Christmas would mean family reunion. I sent my mother an email, letting her know I had booked a flight back to Columbus. Her reply was short and sharp. "Avery, this year isn't convenient. The house is full, too many guests. Save it for another time." I sat frozen in front of the screen, feeling that invisible wall rise again. That was the first crack, the warning sign of the years to come, years in which I would be pushed out of Christmas with my family, openly and without pretense. I reread the words, "The house is full, too many guests," and my chest tightened. That 2-story house in Columbus was anything but cramped. It had 5 bedrooms and a living room big enough to host the entire parish. The truth was simpler. My presence did not fit the picture they wanted to display to others. I closed the laptop and told myself, "Fine. If there is no place for me at their table, then I will build my own with the effort and work they never cared to notice." From that moment on, I knew a clear line had been drawn. Sabrina would always be the center, the one cushioned and lifted up, while I would have to prove my worth entirely on my own, even if no one in the family ever acknowledged it. But from that fracture, my resolve only hardened. If I had to choose between being praised at a Christmas dinner table or building a life with meaning, I would choose the latter. The idea for Lumen Bridge didn't arrive in a dramatic Hollywood-style epiphany. It came after months of watching small businesses in Austin struggle to manage their customers. I often got my hair cut at a salon on South Lamar, where the staff scribbled appointments by hand in an old notebook, and one cancellation would throw off their entire schedule. I once spoke to a dentist in Round Rock who complained that their patient data was scattered across several different programs, none of which communicated with each other. Even HVAC repair shops faced the same issue, relying on Excel files and sticky notes plastered everywhere, with no system to predict when customers might return or when maintenance was due. I saw there, plain as day, a massive gap. Service businesses, the backbone of everyday American life, were being ignored by the complicated, overpriced CRM software built only for large corporations. So I began jotting down ideas on anything within reach, from the notebook in my backpack to the back of coffee receipts from H-E-B. I envisioned a simple CRM platform designed specifically for small businesses, but with predictive power and AI-driven system that could forecast customer behavior instead of merely logging it. Back then, AI wasn't the buzzword it is today, but I believed it could help a salon anticipate when a client might return for their next haircut, or enable a dentist to identify which patients were most likely to cancel so they could call ahead with reminders. I spent the first 18 months bootstrapping, building from nothing. I rented a small house on South Lamar, living in one room and turning the living room into an office. The furnishings were nothing more than a few IKEA desks I assembled myself, a cheap whiteboard I picked up at a flea market, and a swivel chair I bought secondhand off Craigslist. I lived on instant ramen and H-E-B coffee every day, treating them as fuel to keep going. By day I worked freelance contracts to cover rent, and by night I sat coding my product. There were nights I stayed at the screen until 3 in the morning, typing out lines of Python only to erase them, rewriting again. My mind foggy, but my hands still moving, because I believed someday the software would work. When I finally had a demo, I started knocking on the doors of investors. I pitched to more than 40 funds, from well-known names in Austin to a few small groups in Dallas. 38 of them rejected me outright. Some scoffed. CRM for salons. That's not scalable. Others dismissed me with, if it's not built for enterprise, don't bother. I listened, swallowed every word, then went back to refining the code. At last, a small Dallas fund agreed to seed me, along with 2 angel investors, one who had run a chain of dental clinics and another who operated an auto repair network. They understood the pain of the service industry, and they believed in me. On the day I signed the deal, holding that first check, I couldn't stop the tears from streaming down my face. But getting funding was only the beginning. The first 2 years, our burn rate was so intense I often woke in the middle of the night, heart pounding, terrified the company would run out of money before we had real customers. We managed to hire a handful of engineers, but the product was clunky, hard to use. Customers tried it and left. I knew we had to pivot. After countless late-night discussions with my CTO and the team, we decided to add AI-assisted workflows. Instead of just storing data, the software would suggest appointments, automatically send reminders by email and SMS, even integrate voice to CRM so staff could give commands by voice instead of typing. That pivot was what saved the company. In our 3rd year, we signed a contract with a dental chain that had 120 branches across Texas. That was our first major client, the milestone that lifted Lumenbridge out of being just an experiment. Local media began to take notice. The Austin Business Journal ran a piece about a CRM startup redefining how small businesses manage their customers. I agreed to an interview but used the byline, AQ. Bennett, short for my full name, Avery Quinn Bennett. I chose that pseudonym both to protect my privacy and, deep down, because I wasn't ready for my parents or Sabrina to know. Just as I expected, my family didn't make the connection. My mother continued posting photos of Sabrina at parties in Los Angeles, still calling her the pride of the family. My father bragged to neighbors about Sabrina's prestigious Carlisle boyfriend. No one mentioned my name in the press, because they never linked A.Q. Bennett to Avery Bennett, the eldest daughter they assumed was working some ordinary job somewhere. Sabrina, who had never cared much for technology, had even less reason to suspect that the company being written about in Forbes or the Austin Chronicle was one her sister had founded. My world and theirs existed like 2 parallel tracks, never crossing. They were busy painting Sabrina as the ideal daughter, while I was building a company out of sleepless nights and cheap cups of coffee. And while they looked at me with that dismissive gaze, she's fine, she's strong enough. I knew with certainty that every line of code, every pivot, every contract signed was proof of something I had created with my own hands, something no one could ever deny even if my family never saw it. 3 years after founding Lumenbridge, we had our own office, more than 30 employees, and steady revenue. But to my family, I was still the daughter who doesn't need worry. I accepted that silence, because by then I understood, true recognition would never come from them. It had to come from myself and from the people who trusted their careers to the same ship named Lumenbridge. After that Christmas call from my father, slow and blunt like a dull knife. Not sharp enough to cut clean, but heavy enough to keep nicking at every day of late. December, I sat in my small Austin apartment with my laptop open to the inbox, its pale light washing over my face. My inbox filled with holiday outage emails from clients, a salon chain reporting data sync failures, a dental office saying the SMS reminder system was clogged. Instead of thinking about Christmas lights or the smell of roasted turkey, I was buried in logs and glaring red tickets. Maybe this was the way I had learned to cover the emptiness, turning pain into work, working until exhaustion so there would be no mind left to remember the dinner table where I had no seat. My phone buzzed. A message from Lila, my college friend who had seen me through nights of instant noodles and essay writing to the days I typed startup code in a cramped rented room. "Don't work from grief, Avery," she wrote. "Come over. Noah has saved a spot by the tree for Aunt Avery." I read it again and felt a lump rise in my throat. Noah was Lila's 7-year-old son, the boy who always ran to hug me whenever I dropped by. At some point I had become Aunt Avery to him. I didn't even notice when it happened. All I knew was that in that child's eyes, I wasn't an extra, I was family. I shut my laptop, pulled on a thick sweater, and drove through Austin's streets on Christmas Eve. Rows of houses glowed with string lights, and the melody of Silent Night drifted out from a nearby church. When I stopped in front of Lila's home in Round Rock, I saw small figures peeking out from behind the window. The moment I opened my car door, Noah and his little sister May came rushing out, feet still in wool socks, shouting, "Aunt Avery, you're here." They grabbed my hands and pulled me inside, where the house was warm with the scents of cinnamon, turkey, and baked pies. At the table, Marcus, Lila's husband, was carving a golden roast turkey. Lila set down another plate for me and smiled. "Told you, this table always has a seat for you." I sat down, and for the first time in years, I felt invited rather than squeezed in. We ate, talked, and laughed out loud. The kids proudly showed me a new ornament hanging on the tree, a little globe with Aunt Avery written in silver glitter pen. May lisped. "I hung it at the very top so you can see it." My chest tightened, warm and stinging all at once. After dinner, we spread a board game across the table. Dice rolled, the kids bickered loudly over who was cheating, and I sat there with a glass of wine in hand, taking it all in. The room glowed with light and laughter. No one asked me when I was getting married, no one compared me to Sabrina, no one mentioned titles or companies. They simply called me by my name, saved me a seat at the table, and treated me as someone who belonged. As the clock neared midnight, I stepped out onto the porch. The Austin air was crisp, the dry wind moving through bare trees. From my pocket, I pulled out an old snow globe, the gift my grandmother had once placed in my hand. I shook it gently and watched the tiny white flakes swirl inside, falling over the little house encased in glass. In that moment, I whispered to myself, "Enough. No more asking for worth. No more waiting outside the door. From now on, I choose my own table." Driving home, I passed through downtown. In the distance, the giant Zilker tree blazed, thousands of lights strung into a shimmering cone. I pulled over by the curb, took out my phone, and typed a message to Lila. "Thank you for saving me a seat at the table. That seat saved me more than you know." After hitting send, I sat in silence, watching the Zilker lights twinkle against the reflection on my windshield. There were no more tears, only a quiet resolve. Christmas no longer meant waiting for an invitation to the old table. It meant finding the place where someone truly saved me a seat, where I was seen, loved, and allowed to simply be myself. During the week between Christmas and New Year's, when most of Austin glowed with holiday lights and year-end parties, I stayed in the Lumen Bridge office. The glow of my monitor spilling across a desk cluttered with sticky notes and strategy charts. Outside, downtown was unusually still, but inside, my mind spun like gears. It wasn't sorrow over being left behind by my family anymore, it was a strange surge of energy, as if the pain I had just endured had forced me to choose. Keep knocking on the old door, or open one entirely my own. I chose my own door. For 5 straight days, I practically lived in the office, leaving my chair only to run laps around Lady Bird Lake to clear my head. I sketched out a 5-year plan for Lumen Bridge. Not only to secure our hold on the Texas market, but to expand eastward. Nashville emerged as the strongest candidate, a major healthcare hub with lower operating costs than New York, and a talent pool stretching across Appalachia. I scheduled Zoom calls with our market research team, instructing them to conduct a detailed survey of real estate and the startup ecosystem there. Every bullet point in that plan felt like a new stitch, closing the wound Christmas had left behind. By the first quarter, things moved faster than I expected. 2 Fortune 500 clients signed contracts to integrate Lumen Bridge across their entire service networks. One was a logistics company, the other a healthcare insurance giant. Those 2 names alone were enough to catapult our brand forward. I slept only 3 or 4 hours a night, but instead of exhaustion, I felt sharper than ever. Sometimes, standing in the conference room, catching the spark in my employees' eyes as I announced new wins, I thought to myself, "This is my real family, the people who don't need me to prove blood ties." only to keep my word and walk the road with them. To meet the surge in demand, I worked with HR to launch a recruitment plan for 30 new roles, from AI engineers and product managers to customer support staff. We built an API marketplace, allowing outside developers to plug apps directly into our platform, an ambitious step that turned Lumenbridge from a product into an ecosystem. On a Monday afternoon, the office still carried the faint aroma of coffee from the shop downstairs. I had just walked out of a meeting about the Nashville expansion when Eloise, our head of HR, knocked on my office door. She was holding a thick folder, clipped inside the familiar blue binder of our applicant tracking system. Her expression was taut somewhere between hesitation and the strict composure of someone bound by procedure. "Avery, there's an application I think you need to see right away," Eloise began, setting the folder down in front of me. On the label, I read the name, Sabrina Bennett. My heart stalled, my eyes locked on the bold letters. "My sister," Eloise went on, her tone steady and professional, as if she were reporting any other case. The candidate applied for the senior program manager role in the AI platform division. It's the position we just posted last week, with very specific requirements. At least 5 years of experience managing tech projects, knowledge of Agile and Scrum, basic SQL skills, and at least some familiarity with the machine learning lifecycle. This application, she paused slightly, is missing a lot of pieces. Agai. I flipped to the first page. Sabrina's work history centered almost entirely on PR, brand partnerships, and media events. She led digital campaigns for multiple brands, but there was no technical detail to be found. Even the KPI section contained numbers inflated so much that HR had underlined them for verification. I swallowed hard. This was clearly not the right resume for such a technical role. But the more pressing matter wasn't the skills gap, it was the last name printed at the top. "Conflict of interest," Eloise said plainly. "You're the CEO, and the applicant is your sister. Compliance requires you to file a recusal memo immediately." I nodded and opened my laptop. Within 5 minutes, I drafted an email to the entire hiring team. I confirm a direct family relationship with applicant Sabrina Bennett. Therefore, I will withdraw from all stages of screening and interviews until the final round, if applicable, where the CEO normally participates as a member of the board. Any decision to advance or decline will be based solely on standardized scoring and reviewer comments. Eloise also logged the note directly into the ATS to ensure transparency, so no one could later claim Sabrina's application had been paved forward or blocked unfairly. Closing my laptop, I exhaled slowly. "If she makes it past round 1, how do we handle it?" I asked. Eloise had already prepared. By law, before the final round, the company must obtain written consent from the candidate, informing her that a board member who is a direct relative will be present. No names disclosed, only that a direct family member is involved, so the candidate can decide whether to proceed. If Sabrina agrees, you'll attend, as always, observing quietly, asking nothing until the last 5 minutes, and your questions must follow the exact same format as every other candidate. I sat in silence for a long moment. Even in my imagination, I had never pictured the day my sister would submit an application to the very company I had built from scraps. This application, I flipped back to the skills page. How did it even pass the initial screen? Eloise shrugged, a mix of apology and pragmatism. Some of the reviewers rated her network highly. She claims connections with several major media companies, which they thought could become potential clients. Technically, she's lacking, but their argument was, she can learn on the job. Oh? I closed my eyes, the memories flooding back. How many times Sabrina had been lifted forward simply because of who she knew. History repeating itself. But this time, I wasn't the powerless one. "All right," I said slowly. "Let the process run its course. Don't give her preference, but don't cut her early just because she's my sister. If the scoring system moves her through round 1, let her continue like any other candidate. And if she makes it to the final round, follow procedure. Notify that a board member who is a relative will be present, and obtain her consent. I'll sit quietly, observe, and only ask my portion at the end. Nothing more. Eloise nodded, her eyes steady with respect. I knew you'd handle it this way. When she left the room, I sat alone, staring at the blue folder still resting on the desk. Outside, the Austin sun tilted into gold, pouring down onto the traffic along Congress Avenue. My fingers brushed the small snow globe on the bookshelf, and in my mind I whispered, "This time, I won't let emotion drive me. This time, I will stand firmly in my role both as sister and as CEO. And no one will cross that boundary." The glass-walled conference room on Lumen Bridge's 17th floor glowed with Austin's afternoon light. Floor-to-ceiling windows reflected the bustling view of Congress Avenue below. On the long oak table, Eloise had already arranged bottles of water, folders, and laptops for the final interview of the senior program manager role. Ravi, our CTO, with his graying hair and steady baritone voice, sat on the left. Thalia, a seasoned senior PM who had led multiple successful AI projects, sat on the right. Their focus wasn't on me, they were absorbed in checking the agenda. My role, as CEO, was to enter only in the last minutes, exactly as every other candidate before her had experienced. The door opened, and Sabrina walked in. She wore a chic beige blazer dress, her hair styled in loose waves, her eyes bright with confidence. She carried herself as if this room were just another familiar stage. "Thank you for this opportunity," she began, her voice sweet, her gestures polished. When Eloise invited her to introduce herself, Sabrina launched into a smooth monologue about her ability to connect people, her experience managing multi-million-dollar brand campaigns, and her belief that leadership matters more than technical details. Ravi gave a slight nod, his expression unreadable, before moving to a specific question. "If you had to set up a Kanban board for the AI platform team, where would you start? And how would you measure velocity?" Sabrina hesitated just for a moment, then quickly smiled, answering in broad strokes. "I believe in flexibility. Teams need vision more than being confined by numbers like velocity. What matters most is that people feel guided." Thalia tilted her head, offering a polite smile, but she didn't jot down much. A little later, Thalia leaned forward with her question. "Suppose QA discovers a bug in the final sprint, but the deadline has already been promised to the client. How would you balance quality with delivery?" Sabrina blinked, then replied with more sweeping phrases. "I think my role is to keep the team's spirit high, to focus on the big picture. If necessary, I'd inspire the team to overcome obstacles. Not a single word about test plans, risk assessments, or rollback strategies." Ravi tried another, sharper question. "At Lumen Bridge, our AI pipeline has 3 critical handoff points. Data science delivers the model, product writes the spec, and QA conducts testing. How would you coordinate to minimize friction?" Sabrina faltered, then pivoted back to PR. "I've managed many cross-department projects, like when I led a media campaign. I had to coordinate with the production house and the events team. I know how to make everyone feel like part of a shared story." Ravi set his pen down, disappointment flickering in his eyes. For nearly 40 minutes, Sabrina sidestepped every technical question, leaning instead on slogans about vision, empowerment, and leadership. Eloise maintained a neutral expression until the clock ticked into the final minutes. She cleared her throat. "Per procedure, the CEO of Lumen Bridge will now join for the last 5 minutes. The candidate has already given consent. Please come in." The door opened. I stepped inside, dressed in a deep blue blazer, hair neatly tied back. Sabrina turned, her eyes locking onto mine, her face freezing mid-expression. Her mouth opened slightly, disbelief spilling into the room. You're the CEO?" Her voice broke. I met her gaze, my tone even. "Yes. At work, I'm AQ Bennett. And today, I'm just one member of the hiring board." Silence swept the room. I sat across from her, opened her file, and spoke softly, but with precision. "Sabrina, give me an example of a basic SQL query to calculate a retention cohort, for instance, the percentage of users who return within 30 days. Sabrina blinked rapidly, her hands twisting together. I usually delegate that to a data analyst. My role is setting the direction, not writing SQL myself. I nodded, made a note, and let the silence settle. My second question came gently. If you had to write acceptance criteria for a feature that records customer calls in the CRM, how would you describe it? Sabrina forced a smile. I'd let the engineers define the details. My job would just be to make sure the feature creates value for customers. Thalia glanced at me, her eyes quietly confirming that the answer was nowhere near the requirements of the role. I asked one final question. In a cross-team situation where the timeline is slipping, who owns the schedule, the PM or the tech lead? Sabrina hesitated. I think anyone can own it. What matters is that everyone feels connected. Her voice trailed off, the confidence she carried at the start beginning to crack. I closed the folder, looking directly at her but without sharpness. Thank you, Sabrina. As with every other candidate, HR will follow up after the panel completes its review. That concludes our session. I rose, shook her hand the same way I had with all the applicants before. Her hand was cold, trembling. Eloise led Sabrina out of the room while Ravi and Thalia remained, exchanging heavy looks. I didn't give a verdict on the spot. That was policy. Everything would be scored against the rubric, recorded objectively. I only allowed myself one deep breath as the glass door closed, reflecting my face in the burnished glow of the Austin sunset. No triumph, no humiliation, only a truth laid bare. This time, ability was the measure. There was no room for privilege. But Sabrina didn't wait for HR's response. Barely an hour later, as I returned to my desk, the office door swung open. My sister strode in, her face flushed, eyes blazing with anger and disbelief. You knew all along. Her voice rang out, high and sharp. You sat there pretending to observe, but really, you just wanted to humiliate me. I hadn't even spoken before two more figures appeared behind her. My father and mother Michael and Elaine entered as though this company were theirs too, their eyes heavy with reproach. We are family, Avery, my father began, his voice still as hard and commanding as when he used to scold me as a child. You couldn't open one door for your sister? Just one decision from you, and her future would be different. I drew in a long breath and kept my tone steady. This is a company, not our living room. And here, everyone follows the same process. I pressed the intercom button. A minute later, Eloise and Thalia entered. I invited them to sit, then turned back to face my family. I want witnesses for this conversation so no one can claim I did anything wrong. I opened my laptop and pulled up the job description on the screen. The role Sabrina applied for Senior Program Manager requires 5 years of experience managing technology projects, knowledge of Agile and Scrum, basic SQL, and familiarity with the machine learning lifecycle. The panel scored her against clear criteria. I recused myself from the earlier rounds and only joined for the final 5 minutes with the candidate's written consent. Every step has been documented in the system. My father's voice grew sharp. This process exists because you put it in place. You could choose to be flexible. I met his gaze directly. No, father. This process exists to protect the company from bias and compromise, and precisely because I am Sabrina's sister, I am the one who must never break it. Elaine cut in then, her voice sweet but edged. That Christmas. The house was crowded. We didn't mean to forbid you, we just wanted everything neat and proper. I smiled, but my eyes stayed cold. Mother, I remember clearly. You told me directly, don't come home, you'll complicate things with the guests. It wasn't about seating, it was because I didn't fit the image you wanted to display. I was too independent, I talked too much about work, I was different from Sabrina and that made you uncomfortable. The room sank into heavy silence. Sabrina clutched her handbag, her voice trembling but sharp. You always have to compete. You build a company, you flaunt your success, you make everyone see me as nothing but a leech. I answered slowly, every word deliberate. No, Sabrina. I'm not competing. I'm just done shrinking myself. I did that all through childhood so you could shine, so our parents could rest easy. But now, I don't live that way anymore. Turning to my parents, my tone hardened, though my voice did not rise. There is a position suitable for Sabrina, marketing coordinator, entry level. If she does well, she can advance to associate PM, and from there move higher. That path is fair. There are no shortcuts. My father slammed his hand on the table. You dare make your sister start that low? Everyone starts where they are capable, I replied, my hand trembling slightly but my gaze steady. I once made coffee, coded until 3 in the morning. No one put me on a pedestal. Fairness means the same for her. Ah! Elaine turned away, her eyes clouded with both disappointment and helplessness. Sabrina shot to her feet, her chair scraping harshly across the floor. I don't need your pity, I'll find my own place. She stormed out, heels striking hard against the ground. My parents rose too, their eyes laden with reproach, and followed their younger daughter out of the room. The door closed. The office fell so silent I could hear my own heartbeat. My hands trembled slightly on the table, but I did not break. Eloise placed a gentle hand on my shoulder. You did the right thing, the process was clear, the staff will respect that. Thalia nodded in agreement. I drew in a deep breath and lifted my gaze to the window. Traffic still streamed endlessly down Congress Avenue, the Texas sun spilling across the red-tiled rooftops. I knew I had just lost something, or rather, confirmed that it had never truly existed. Yet, I also felt something else, stronger. This boundary was mine, and it would keep me whole. A week after that confrontation in the office, news of Sabrina reached me not through a family call, but via a forwarded email from a PR partner. A major promotional contract she had held with an international cosmetics brand collapsed within days. The cause? A livestream event riddled with technical errors, a social campaign launched without any crisis protocol, leaving the brand publicly mocked. I skimmed the report, feeling neither triumph nor pity, only a quiet acknowledgement. The world outside was far harsher than the safe stage our parents had always rolled out beneath her feet. Then came another piece of news, just as swiftly. Ethan, the fiancé my family once hailed as the golden match, announced the postponement of their engagement. His reason was polished, diplomatic. I need to focus on work. But everyone understood the subtext, doubts born from Sabrina's recent failures. Within a matter of days, my sister lost both her professional footing and her romantic security, plunging into a kind of crisis she had never faced before. One Friday afternoon, just as I wrapped up a meeting with the API Marketplace team, Eloise's voice came through the intercom. Michael and Elaine Bennett are in the lobby. They say they're your parents. I froze. For the first time in 10 years, my parents had set foot in Austin and at the very company I had built. When they stepped out of the elevator, I caught my father's eyes scanning the open office. Rows of engineers packed tightly at their coding desks, a white wall emblazoned with the blue Lumen Bridge logo. The sound of laughter from the sales team celebrating a new deal. He looked older than I remembered, hair streaked with gray, his voice raspy as he muttered, noisy, but alive. My mother looked straight at me, not avoiding my gaze as she once did. She drew in a breath, her voice trembling but firm. We were wrong, Avery. Wrong for a long time. I pulled out chairs and invited them into a small conference room. Meeting their eyes, I said, this door was never closed. But the rules here are clear: respect, honesty, fairness, no shortcuts. No more comparisons. My father's lips moved, struggling to form the words until at last he managed, haltingly, I'm sorry for not believing in you. The words were short, awkward, but it was the first time I had ever heard them from him. I felt myself trembling, but instead of tears, I simply nodded. Thank you for saying that. A week after that meeting, Eloise reported. Sabrina had reapplied, this time not for senior program manager, but for marketing coordinator, an entry-level position aligned with her actual skills. Her application included a written test. Design a lifecycle email sequence for new customers, draft social copy measured against engagement, KPIs, and complete a case study on turning UGC into qualified leads, MQLs. The results weren't brilliant, but they were enough to pass. Sabrina was invited to interview like every other candidate, seated in front of the same panel and the same questions, with no special treatment. When the panel scored her, the result landed in the acceptable range. Eloise announced the salary within the transparent pay band, not a cent more than her peers. I signed the approval, feeling both unfamiliar and at peace. My sister was finally entering this company, not under the title of Michael and Elaine's darling daughter, but through her own effort, even if at the lowest starting line. That evening, I went over to Lila's house. The kitchen was filled with the smell of waffles, and Noah came running to show off the Christmas card he had made by hand. I told Lila everything from the meeting with my parents to Sabrina starting over. She sat silent for a moment, then laid her hand on mine. Forgiving doesn't mean forgetting, Avery. Forgiving means you stop letting the old wound drive your life. You're still driving, but now with your own hands on the wheel. I sat there, listening to the sound of children laughing in the living room, the warm glow of yellow light spilling across the dining table. I knew the road with my family would still be long, and there would be no miracle of reconciliation overnight. But the small steps, an apology, recognition, a fair starting point for Sabrina had begun to appear. And, for me, that was enough to call them steps in the right direction. 3 months after the day Sabrina officially signed her contract as a marketing coordinator, the rhythm of life at Lumen Bridge felt different. I still remember her first morning in the office, the confident air replaced by a trace of nervousness, her eyes flicking toward me as if testing for a reaction. But week by week, I saw the change not in how she carried herself but in her work rhythm. Sabrina started coming in early, sometimes even sitting in the cafe downstairs before the office opened. Late at night, when I walked past the marketing desks, her screen still glowed, filled with basic SQL queries, awkward, clumsy lines of code, but written with real effort. Thalia, who had sat on the interview panel that day, later reported to me. She shadows the team sprint every other week. Sometimes she doesn't catch on, sometimes she completely mistakes concepts like velocity or backlog refinement. But the next time, she studies again, corrects herself, and improves. I nodded, saying nothing, but inside I felt something unfamiliar, not pride exactly, but a quiet relief that my sister was, at least in part, willing to begin from a starting line that matched her true ability. On another front, my parents began to change too, not loudly, but unmistakably. Elaine started calling me every weekend. She no longer repeated Sabrina's name or slipped into comparisons. Instead, she asked, "What are you working on? Are you too busy? Have you rested at all?" I listened, answered, and realized for the first time her voice sounded like that of a mother genuinely caring for her daughter, not a spectator focused only on the performance of the favorite child. Michael, for his part, sent emails, sometimes an article on SaaS, sometimes a case study on AI workflows, always with the note, "I found this interesting, what do you think?" For the first time, he wasn't imposing, wasn't dismissive, but genuinely wanted to hear my analysis. One afternoon at the end of November, I found a small envelope on my desk. Inside was an anniversary card from my parents. In my mother's handwriting, "Come if you want, no dress code, just family." I held that card for a long time. It wasn't a perfect promise, nor a complete redemption, but it was utterly different from all the invitations before. No instructions on how to dress, no emphasis on important guests, just a simple invitation. The night before my flight, I drove out of downtown Austin, my car rolling north for hundreds of miles. Before turning into the hotel in Columbus, I found myself detouring past the old house where my childhood had been stretched thin into the role of the backup daughter. The house still stood, its paint faded, its windows glowing with the same familiar yellow light. I stopped across the street, opened the glove compartment, and took out the snow globe. With a gentle shake, I watched the white flakes swirl, drifting down onto the tiny house inside the glass. Calmly, I whispered, "I don't need them to define me anymore." The next morning, as I walked into the anniversary gathering, I no longer counted empty chairs, wondered who sat beside whom, or worried about which eyes turned toward me. I simply chose my own table, a place to have an honest conversation with my mother, to listen as my father shared an article he had read, and to see Sabrina, focused as she told a new colleague about the time she learned how to write acceptance criteria. No grand stage was needed, only the simple feeling of having a seat without having to bow my head. That Christmas, I was no longer haunted by being shut out. I could be at Lila's house, gathered with Noah and May as they hung another Aunt Avery ornament on the tree. Or I could return to Columbus, if it felt safe, without pressure. The choice rested with me, not with conditional invitations. And now, as I tell this story, I realize something simple. True victory is not making anyone else bow their head. It is no longer bowing mine to the old version of myself. I have left the old door behind and stepped into the room I built, warm enough to sit in and bright enough to finally see myself clearly.